My name is Robert Schmid, Deloitte Digital's Chief IoT Technologist, also known as Mr. IoT. This week on Coffee with Mr. IoT, my co-host Rachel Mohrmann and I are talking with Chris Weitz, one of the lead strategists at GE Digital, and we're also going to have Michael Raynor join us, a director at Deloitte Monitor. He'll be with us shortly. Chris, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay. Chris, you have an interesting history as far as I mean, we met actually originally when I was a client and you were at Deloitte, and
Right.
now it's almost flipped. So you left Deloitte 2 years ago, 3 years ago. What are you up to now? I mean, I know I just want the audience to also get
Sure.
what exciting things you're up to.
Yeah. Well, I decided to go off and earn a respectable living here for a change, and so I'm now working full time at General Electric Digital here in Silicon Valley on the East Bay. So it was a very interesting opportunity and a very interesting situation to help GE Digital launch their play in the industrial internet, the internet of very large things. And it was just too interesting to pass up, so here I am. So just by way of background, you're right, I did spend a good 6 or so years at Deloitte. Before that, I was managing director at KPMG Consulting for many years, and before that I was doing all kinds of IT stuff, so I've been doing this since dinosaurs roamed the earth, as I say. And so I'm pleased to be able to contribute in any way, shape, or form, and just help move the ball forward for the industry and for the world.
Thanks for joining us, Chris. It's funny when you call yourself a dinosaur because I actually have known you as always being one of the ones that's leading both at Deloitte and now at GE. So thank you.
Some dinosaurs grow feathers.
Michael, thanks for joining. I'm glad you were able to join us. Michael, you're a director at Deloitte Monitor, and the Financial Times says from LinkedIn here, one of the most articulate and interesting of strategists. So welcome.
How'd you earn that title?
It costs much less than you might think.
I have to say this is interesting. We often have these somewhat techie conversations on Coffee with Mr. IoT, and today I have two strategists. One of the main things you on is, you actually for IoT wrote what we still use today. I run around. I just talked about it yesterday, actually, to a bunch of wholesale distributor executives about the information value loop. You're also very forward thinking when it comes to strategy. Give us some thoughts on IoT. A little intro.
Sure. I mean, the thing about strategy is not surprisingly, pardon me, taken from how Monitor Deloitte in general thinks about strategy, which is as a set of integrated choices. So strategy fundamentally is about making choices. You're going to do this as opposed to that. And those choices are very often driven by trade-offs. And my view of it is that in a lot of business models, a fundamental constraint that drives the choices we make is the availability and cost of information. A lot of what we do once we start thinking about it is driven by the fact that we simply don't know what's happening in other parts of the organization, and we have to build business models to accommodate that fact. I think what makes the IoT so special is that it dramatically reduces the cost of information and increases its availability. And it's almost to the point where in many contexts information is almost free. And so when you take something that used to be a binding constraint and make it abundant and almost costless, that changes just about everything. And to my mind, at least, that's what makes the IoT not just an interesting set of technologies, but something that fundamentally changes the strategy equation.
Michael, one of the things I like so much about your information value loop, and the one thing I talk about is the availability of information through sensors is one thing, but you really highlighted all the way around the loop how you can generate value through the network, through standards, and through augmented intelligence and machine learning. I think, Chris, one of the things that when I think of GE Predix, it's really good at connecting lots and lots of machines and things very easily. Anything you want to add to the value loop that Michael talks about?
Yeah, sure. I mean, just in general terms, the thing that makes the industrial Internet of Things interesting to GE, as well as all the players in the industrial space, is that it's really sort of an undiscovered continent, so to speak, and that so much of the world is non-sensor enabled and non-monitored and not particularly efficient. And that if you take the idea of putting, the equivalent of, one of these on things like a street light, or things like obviously a car, or an aircraft engine, or an aircraft, or an airport, or literally the entire logistics value chain, your mind just kind of goes wild with ideas of potential for efficiency gains, optimization of the world, because the world is still a very inefficient. Anybody who gets in the car and drives on the freeways in California can tell you that for sure. And just the notion of being able to put the cheap technology that's become available over the last 30 or 40 years on the internet and on mobile devices in things that matter is really kind of an enticing idea, because when you can generate data so cheaply, like Michael said, when the computing power for analytics, especially on the cloud, is so strong, it really opens the door to a lot of things that were impossible just a few years ago, and it really changes the nature of the modern economy away from a capital-intensive economy where it was how many factories can you build and how many large, complex rotating machines can you ship, to how much data can you capture and how many insights can you gain from the sensors and the analytics on your equipment, so that you can optimize and potentially save billions and billions of dollars throughout an entire. And that's a big deal, and it's way more important to most people on Earth than whether or not you've captured Pikachu on your phone today. And I think we need to kind of put it in perspective here, because we were joking yesterday here in the office that we could put sensors on streetlights, and you can capture Pikachus from the streetlights with our sensors without even leaving the couch. And so it really becomes a creative exercise now to determine, strategically speaking, and Michael and I have talked about this, that it becomes an art of the possible puzzle. And that's why strategy is so important.
So you mentioned that you're kind of an old dog with new tricks coming into this digital world, and you've been quite innovative and leading the front, and you're leading really big things. What does that value mean to companies like you, and what does that mean for your forward-thinking strategy? What kind of things are totally changing, and what things kind of remain the same?
Well, as the old Broadway tune goes, money makes the world go round, right? And so when there's a lot of money on the table, and if you can save just 1% of $1 billion, you just made a lot of money.
So
and
for that small little tweak that has exponential benefits?
A small percentage of a very large sum of money is a very large sum of money.
Yeah.
So, so for example, if in, say, the locomotive and railroad industry, not that many people understand that, for example, when most trains pull into most train terminals around the world, no one knows what's in them. Literally, no one knows. And so if you can actually figure out a way to put sensors on shippers or on packaging throughout the logistics supply chain, you could incredibly optimize the entire global logistics supply chain in a way that would shave far more than 1% off the total cost of shipping anything from point A to point B, from a truck to a train to a boat, and then reverse all the way back, because the global supply chain is highly integrated and not particularly efficient. And there's a huge amount of money on the table that is implicit in every product that we buy every day. And if you can take that cost out, the entire reward goes cascading through the economy. And Michael, I'm sure you have a point of view on that too.
Well, the only thing I would add, I think that's exactly right. I mean, you're describing the first steps of what I think would be a transformational journey. Where the echo's feeding me back here. I don't know if the technology is letting us down. But in the first instance, knowing what's in those trains or those ships on their way in is something that would take out inefficiencies in the current system, to be sure. And then you get to ask yourself the question, well, now that I know I'm going to know what's in those containers, how would I, to use a 90s term that perhaps has a new relevance, how do I re-engineer everything that I'm doing to take advantage of that all of those data are available? So in the first instance, there's efficiencies to be had, and that's critically important because that's what gets the ball rolling. That's what gives organizations the courage to make those initial investments. And once they start to see what's possible, well, then the sky's the limit.
Well, one of the things that's really interesting to me and makes me kind of excited in my old feathered dinosaur mode to come into the office these days is that some of the technology that we perfected over the last 40 years in information technology and IT is now being injected into what is affectionately known as OT, operational technology. These are the shop floor controllers. These are the devices that sit next to gas turbines in power plants, or the little devices on aircraft that optimize the flight controllers. These operational technology systems have really missed the boat in the last 20 or 30 years in terms of all the internet technology that's made our consumer lives and our IT shops efficient. But what we're trying to figure out is how to merge IT and OT and have it blend into be one thing, one holistic environment where you actually can see how, to use our example, the Pikachu squeezy toy for your dog that comes from a factory somewhere in mainland China goes into a particular truck, a particular container, and all the way to your house via Amazon. And any company that has, say, an SAP, Oracle, or ERP system or anything else can see that throughout the supply chain event, and that's impossible today. And at the same time, now, and this is where we kind of get outer space, wild crazy, but at the same time, then if Walmart, who's taking the shipment, can actually understand when it's going to show up, they can actually work with the power company, like a Duke Energy, for example, and they can optimize the air conditioning in their warehouse and the power consumption from the power plant upstream at the power company to drive even more efficiencies out of the entire economy when they're all unified in an information flow that they all lack today, which is pretty exciting stuff.
So I can tell you, whenever I talk with Chris, I always get excited because he has so many examples, and he's the one guy that always shows you how he can make lots and lots of money with IoT. So whenever I want someone to convince someone about value, he's the guy to bring to. I just want to say, if you're just joining us, I'm Robert Schmid, Deloitte Digital's Chief IoT Technologist, and you're watching Coffee with Mr. IoT. Today, Rachel and I are having Michael Raynor and Chris Weitz as our guests. Michael, I have a question for you. You talk a lot about when you talked about the value loop, you talked about the sensors. What are the other things on the loop that you really find fascinating and have seen? Particularly what I'm interested in is, and one of the things I talk about in our tech trends is the difference of brownfields versus greenfields. And this very much goes together with GE, right? Have been lots and lots of sensors out there, but they haven't been connected. You don't have to start from scratch, so even the network adds value. Give us some examples where the value wasn't so much in the data, but in other areas of IoT that you've seen. It's just, I love those examples because we talk so much about strategy. How do I get them from strategy to doing something? And by having these examples, I hope to help that. So, Michael, sorry, a long intro for a short question.
No worries. Well, and it's a good question as well. It builds on, in some ways, on what Chris was observing. In fact, it occurred to me we've got a new meaning for the acronym IoT, which is Information and Operations Technology, and indeed, that's what the value loop was intended to capture. You alluded to this earlier, right? So it's a whole suite of technologies that have all finally gotten good enough at the same time that we can now do something in an integrated way. I like Chris's observation as well that it's not as though connected devices is brand new and nobody ever thought of it before. Operational technology has been out there for many decades in siloed solutions that have been optimized for specific applications. What marrying that to the internet means is that all of a sudden what used to be a whole series of closed, very tightly controlled suites of technologies now become platforms. Mm-hmm. So to try and answer your question, Robert, I think what becomes fascinating now is that every stage around the loop and all of those technologies, there's so many more choices, right? You could build a platform for sensor technology. That's great. You could build a communications platform. You could build a data aggregation platform, a data analysis platform. any one of those stages could be an open platform that extends across multiple applications. Or you've got choices still around building a closed loop because issues like, for example, the timeliness or security of the data are simply so critically important that you need to build firewalls around it. So I think it's the business the opportunities to make money, as Chris has alluded to, have multiplied many times as a result of a whole suite of technologies getting better simultaneously.
Will we see a closed ecosystem, I'm going to call it like Apple, where we're going to have everything from all the sensors to the platform all the way back to the apps, or what do you think?
Hard to get 100% of anything, right? So I don't know that anything will be perfectly closed. I also don't think everything will be completely open. So forgive me for making a potentially obvious observation. I think if there's a direction, however, the direction is going to be, and I don't think this will be a surprise to anyone, the direction is toward more modularity, more openness. But that's why we play the game, because deciding precisely how quickly and in what ways to move in that direction, unfortunately, that makes all the difference.
Well, the other thing that's interesting is the control point question, which is obviously a good topic for any strategy discussion, which is what are the control points in any economic transaction flow, and then who controls the control point, if anyone. And you could have long and enthusiastic arguments about whether, for example, the old Microsoft Windows Wintel architecture was an open or closed environment at all, because Microsoft would love you to believe that it was open, and others would have you believe that it was closed. And so it really is sort of a philosophical debate, which sort of becomes boring when you're out there in the economic world. The real question is,
are you guys open? Chris, is GPredix open?
I'm not even going to take that bait, but what I will tell you is
try
that, it. No, I'm not going to go there. But what I will tell you, though, is that the world of the industrial world has been very closed for many, many decades, and that it is, like Michael said, trending toward open. And one of the things that occurred to me in the last couple of months is that the industrial controllers, which, by the way, almost nobody in the information technology or consumer technology world even pays attention to. These industrial controllers are the devices that sit next to all kinds of expensive things, and they're usually made by companies like Siemens, or GE, or somebody like that. They talk to these expensive machines to keep them healthy and happy. They tend to be very, very closed, but they're going to move toward, I think anyway, this is my opinion, they're going to move toward more like software-controlled networks. Like, for example, the software-controlled, computing, the software-controlled data center, the software-controlled devices that you've seen from companies like Arista in networking, which have really changed the game, because if you can put any software on a white-labeled box and disrupt the proprietary nature of any market in information technology, you can do the same thing with operational technology. And therefore, you can then push software updates downstream to operational technology boxes, and you can update them so that you can, like, say, tune a power plant, or something else like that, tune a factory. Now, obviously, this is a very interesting question from the perspective of security. So if you think security is becoming more boring, you're simply not paying attention. And one of the constraints of all this, of course, it's one thing to talk about a hacker coming in and upsetting the configuration parameters of your coffee pot. It's an entirely different phenomenon to worry about hackers coming in and making your factory stop.
Or a locomotive, as you mentioned earlier.
Well, that's literally a train wreck. So you.
I
got a joke in. So
now.
So, Chris, you mentioned that that we're trending towards more open loop, and I'm wondering, how does the speed of the changes in technology and even things like edge computing, so you talked about having a box that can be controlled through operational technology, but even having that box act as its own agent, act as its own player, how does that affect how you guys are looking forward? So, we talked about keeping it more open, but even just re-engineering things and thinking towards the future. What's some of your basic strategies and principles going forward with this ever-changing technology, and faster piece of technology?
Sure. Well, at the risk of making gross generalizations, which of course I'm paid to do, the one thing I think is inevitable is that information is going to flow both directions, up and down the chain. It's no longer just going to be give me sensor information from a gas turbine downstream, or give me information from a thing down so I can understand whether something needs maintenance. It's going to go up as well. It's going to say, oh, it looks like you need an adjustment. We're going to send you a control. So it's going to be two-way controls. It's almost entirely one way now. It's downstream. Now it's going to go up. And that's going to really change the nature of the game, because it will allow you to do real-time tuning of the entire industrial world, which is going to be fascinating. Okay, so if you think your cars are watching you, wait till the road and the street is also watching you. Okay, and watching everyone else. So that's completely doable today. And the question is, are we smart enough to do it wisely and well before it gets creepy and unacceptable, okay, or dangerous?
Michael, I want to. We have about a few more minutes left. As always, time flies. So two things. One, I know people talk about the digital twin, which is really a digital representation of physical products, right?
Right.
And you talk about creepy. I sit there all the time and I wonder, what is my digital twin, right? Is that Facebook, or is that my wearable, or whatever? So I'd be curious to hear about what's the line between what's acceptable and what's creepy, and maybe just whatever closing comment you have on IoT. That's one. Two, we have a tradition on this Coffee with Mr. IoT, and it started with my two favorite ladies here, Rachel and Tracy. They talked about shoes and wearables. So, whatever closing comment you have on IoT, that's one. Two. So, Chaz, we are hearing you double. So we always talk about what shoes did we bring for this. So I have a fancy flip-flop today. And so if you want to share, we always have a good time with this. Oh, another flip-flop. So anyhow, back to you guys, closing talks, last thoughts.
So I guess from my perspective, the creepiness line, the best I can do to describe it in general terms is to think about the difference between optimization and control. So I'll pick up on Chris's example of the car watching you, the street watching. If all of these things are watching you passively with an eye to optimizing the environment around you so that you can do better the things that you want to do, then maybe there are ways to get to square yourself with that reality. When the world starts watching you so that it can control what you do and manipulate the environment you work in to create incentives and nudges and things that take you in ways you wouldn't want to, I think it actually starts to feel like an impingement on individual freedoms. The folks at MIT Media Lab have talked about the need for a digital bill of rights. I think that need is going to become increasingly acute. So if we're using the IoT to control the power plant and reduce CO2 emissions, then what's not to like? When we start using it to optimize for people's experiences, improve their health care, what's not to like? When we get confused and we start optimizing for machines and controlling people, then maybe we've crossed the wrong line.
I totally agree with that, Michael, and I think it's something that everybody needs to be aware of, because usually laws and social norms are behind the technology curve, and it takes a while to catch up, and usually we're not current enough with some exposures, and we're always catching up. And I think this is a situation where we're going to see that too, especially back to the comment about digital twin. Digital twin is a technical term that GE Research uses when we have a full digital mock-up of a thing, whether it's an aircraft engine or an MRI machine or whatever. But you can make a digital twin of any complex thing, and it's going to be easier and cheaper to do that all the time. So you could theoretically make it, like was discussed, like Robert was saying, digital twin of a human being, and that could be valuable when you're doing medical diagnosis or analysis of health issues. And it's already started with Fitbits and whatnot. But when you can do digital twins to predict things with confidence, like we're trying to do with our MRI machines, because GE makes MRIs and PET scanners, it turns out that, by the way, our digital twin analysis and analytics is actually far more accurate than physicians when analyzing radiology. Start being able to analyze human beings from a biological and physical perspective, we obviously have to be in front of that so it doesn't get misused.
Just when we get talking about my most favorite subject, we have to get to the end. I would love to go into just the MRIs and how GE is helping healthcare, but unfortunately, I guess we won't get to do all those follow-up questions. Right, Robert? You're going to cut me off?
Yep. Well, it looks like this coffee break is coming to a close. I want to thank my guests, Michael and Chris here, for a great conversation. And please join Rachel and me again next Friday, 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern, for another Coffee with Mr. IoT. And by the way, if you missed any part today, you can watch all episodes on my YouTube channel. With that, thank you, Chris. Thank you, Michael.
Have a great weekend, guys.
Chris, you, Rachel.
Thank you. Cheers.
Bye, guys.